Good morning, Rabbi.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. Great. You hear me? I hear you. That's good. Chavra Shmulik has corona. We should give him a call maybe later. All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Pesachim Daf Mem Dalid. Pesachim Mem Dalid is a daf mamish of Yoredeya. We're going to be learning three very important topics, very important sugyas in the halachas of Yoredeya. The first of which we already started yesterday on Daf Mem Gimel Amud Beis. Amar Rabbi Bohu, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, Kol Yisurim Shabbat Ein Heter Mitztaref LeIser Chutz MiIsurei Nazir. This is what we would call the combination principle. That's number one. And we don't say that Heter is Mitztaref LeIser the way we explained, just quickly reviewing the way Rashi understands the sugya, that if you have a Chatzi Kezayis of Chelev and a Chatzi Kezayis of Basar, and you eat them. And we're going to go into more details, as Danny pointed out. How did you eat them? Did you eat them together? We're going to see in a moment what's pshat eating them together. We don't say, you ate a kezayis. Eating a kezayis is called a maisa achila. Some of it was not kosher. You should get malchus. We don't say that. Now, just to reiterate, Rabbi Yechanan himself is the shita that holds chatzi shiur is asur min hatoira 100%. But for you to get malchus for eating chelev, you're going to be, if you're eating any non-kosher, you have to eat a kezayis, and we don't say that hetem and staraf le'isr, with the exception of nazir. That was this first statement that we learned. The second sugi that we're going to learn about today is the concept of eating a kezayis bichdei achilas pras. How do you define eating? Eating something doesn't mean eating it all in one go in your mouth. Eating it over the period of time that it takes an average person to eat a pras, a piece of a bread. Now, whether the standard bread was out of 8 eggs, and pras, piece meaning half, would mean the amount of time that it takes to eat the volume of 4 eggs, or whether a full loaf is 6 eggs, we learned this already together so many times, and a pras is 3 eggs. But poyel mamish, you have all these shittas in halacha, the shortest of which is probably 3 or 4 minutes of the time of bichdei achilas pras, the longest of which is probably 12 minutes, right? Whichever one that is, that anything that's eaten within that period of time is called eaten together. And the third big fundamental sugya that we're going to have on Daf Mem Dalid is the rule of tam ke'ikr. Flavor is equivalent to substance. We will define substance as something that's discernible to the eye. The moment it's no longer discernible, it's halachically called, it's the flavor is here. And the halacha is that permitted food that acquired the taste of forbidden food, this is independent of the first topic of combination. There is overlap, but it's a separate topic. That if permitted food acquires the taste of forbidden food, it itself is transformed into forbidden food. Gewalt. And we're going to have 3 approaches as to what's the source of tam ke'ikr, whether it is from Mishras Hanavim, even though Mishras was used by Rabbi Yechanan to teach you the din of chutz mi'isurei nazir. We're going to have another potential source, which is basar b'chalav, and the third potential source from where we can learn tam ke'ikr is from the dinim of giulei nachrim, as we will explain. This will also lead us into the rule of noisen tam livgam is muter. So if a pot was used to cook in it non-kosher foods, what goes into the walls of the pot, halachically, is the tam, because it's not discernible. The substance, you don't see it going in there. The tam goes in there. And the rule that after 24 hours, if you then cook kosher food v'di'evet after the fact, since the taste that's in there is already pagum, it gives off a putrid taste. Noisen tam l'v'gam is mutter. Within the 24 hours, the tam, even though the tam is always a little bit pagum, but halachically it's not yet pagum. All of that is connected to the sugya of tam ke'ikr. And Chevra, with that, let us start on Daf Mem Daled Amud Aleph. We left off on the fourth line from the top of the Amud in the beginning of the line. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam sha'ar kol yom v'dvarim. Okay, so beginning with, again, the first of the three dinim we're going to be learning about today, as we had on Daf Mem Gimel Amud Beis, that Rabbi Abo quotes Rabbi Yechanan, sharing the rule that we don't combine, that kol isurim shebat Torah ein heten mitzaref le'isir, right, with the exception. Then Zaidi gave the other exception, but let's not focus on anyone's exceptions, just on the rule that there is no combination. Ein heten mitzaref le'isir. So says the Gemara, Yosef Rav Dimi v'kam Allah Allah Hashmaitza, and he was repeating the story of Rabbi Abo Rabbi Yechanan. Ein heten mitzaref le'isir. Amalei Abayil Rav Dimi, what are you talking about? The Chol Yisurim Shabbat Torah ein heter mitzaref le'isir? No, it can't be. Ve'hatnan. Let's go with this challenge from a Mishnah in Tvul Yoim. Let's remember, my friends. I mean, the Mishnah says Tvul Yoim, but let's chazer the dinim of a Tvul Yoim. That a person who needed to go to the mikveh and who went to the mikveh, and even though after the mikveh the person's tumah departed him or her in the context of that they can eat chulin, they won't be metama chulin. There's nothing wrong with chulin becoming tamei, but certain people would have a higher standard to chulin, but you won't be metamit. Nevertheless, a tful yoim has the koyach to be metama truma. Truma, as we learned above in this Masechta, can normally become tuma even on the level of a shlishi, becomes puzzle on that level. A tful yoim has a status of a sheni, so a tful yoim can make truma tamei. So says the Mishnah, what happens if there's a mixture of food? And the example that we are giving is you have a mikvah, you have porridge, right? You have hot cereal, which is a grain product, and that the grain is truma, and v'hashum v'hashemen, and the seasoning and the spices, in our case, both the garlic and the oil is made out of chulin. And it's all mixed together. So the Mishnah begins like this: that if a tful yom touched part of it, pasal askulan, we don't say, well, 1 second, only the truma can become a shlishi, the chulin cannot. That we but Michlal don't say, because the primary ingredient, it's a porridge, is truma, and it's all a single mass, it's all mixed in together. So we consider everything truma. However, says the Mishnah, but the mikvah is made out of chulin, the grain is made out of chulin, but the shum and the shemen that was put in there is made out of truma. And the havamina of the one who's asking the question of Rav Dimi is based again on this havamina, that even though if you don't have the ratio of 100 to 1, the truma is not going to be batal, and that's true. But the havamina here is that din is only a din derabanan, which would mean that on a de'oraisa level, as long as the roiv, right, the majority is truma, is here chulin, so the truma should be batal. We'll see why that's so important. And the Mishnah says the nagat tvul yom mitzvasan, and until yom touches a part of the porridge. Very interesting din. Loi pasal elamakei magoi b'lvad. All of it does not become tamei, because we don't view it as truma. Nevertheless, and this must be a din derabanan, that the place where the tvul yom touched, that place becomes disqualified. Now we have to understand the havinan ba makoi magoi amai psula. Why would the chachamim make such a chumrah? Habatli lohu tavlin b'roiv. Again, like we explained, the havamina is that for there to be a bittul, the bittul that's normally needed by truma, which is 100 to 1, is only a din derabanan. So yes, there is some truma mixed there that midrabanan, let's say a non-kohen cannot eat, but that's only a din derabanan. That's only a din derabanan. And it's, since that's the case, it doesn't make sense for the chachamim to be machmer and to say that the tful yom is metama the place where he touched. And v'amarabba baruch chana maitam. No, the reason why the chachamim were machmer that the place that he touched becomes tamei is not the way you think, that the whole din of needing 100-to-1 ratio is a din that Rabbanan. No, it's not. It's a din d'oraisa. And since it was not batul, now here comes the question: Hoyol v'zor loika aleim b'kazayis. That since if a non-kohen were to eat a kazayis, he would be chayiv malchus. He would be chayiv malchus. So now it makes sense that when it comes to the imparting of tuma, the chachamim, even though the main ingredient here is chulin, but the chachamim at least were machmin in the place where he touched. There's a few things over here. We are definitely accepting that the prohibition of consuming is more chamur than touching and imparting tuma. The imparting of tuma can go down a notch, but it has to only go down one notch. So if the problem of eating is only a problem that Rabbanan, then it didn't make sense for the Gemara. It didn't make sense the din of the Mishnah that the place where he touched, the Chachamim should say that that's considered tummy. But Eloma, that's what we are concluding, that if you don't have the ratio 100-to-1, there is no bittul on a level of doiraisa. So what you have here is real dimua. You have a mixture of chulin and truma, and the Chachamim were machmir. But hold on, let me ask you a question. The statement that he said was that if a non-kohen eats it, he's going to get malchus if he ate a kazayis. Now, the understanding here is that if he ate a sum total of a kazayis. Don't forget, there is some truma in here, but there's a lot of chulin in here. Why would he be chayiv malchus? I get it that we don't say that the truma is batal. So a non-kohen cannot eat it. But for you to get malchus, if you only eat a kazayis, that only fits if heter is mitzdaref le'isr. In other words, I get it's not batal. So there's chulin and truma. But for you to get malchus, the rule is you have to eat a kazayis. He's saying that you ate a kazayis and you're going to get malchus. It must be because heter is mitzdaref le'isr. Now, hechi dami, lav mishum, the heter mitzdaref le'isr. This is not the exception, not of Isurei Nazir. This is not the exception of Ze'iri of Chametz v'Pesach. This goes against the principle. Here you see heter mitzdaref le'isr. So here I want to say, Danny, what you mentioned yesterday, the answer will be that when it says that taka de zor will be loike if he ate a kazayis, you know what that means? If he ate so much of this hot cereal, so much porridge, that he ate a total of a kazayis only of the seasoning, only of the shemen and the shum. Now, obviously, how can you eat? It's a mixture. The roiv is taka chulindike grain, hot cereal. So you don't have to eat it in one go. So answers the Gemara that loy, heter is not mitzdaref le'isr. If all azar will eat from this mixture is one kazayis, part of it is chulin, part of it is truma, I get it's not batal. The truma was not batal, but you're not going to be loike because ein heter mitzdaref le'isr. The kazayis that he ate was the ike kazayis b'chdei achilas pras. How do you define the mais achila b'chlal? Forget about a mixture. If a person is going to, God forbid, eat a kazayis of treif, of chazer, God forbid, they'll be chayiv malchus if they ate a kazayis. Well, they're going to be chayiv if they ate it in one go. But even if they schlepped out their eating, but they ended up eating in the time that it takes an average person to eat a half of a loaf of bread. Half is either 4 eggs volume or 3 eggs volume. Again, from 4 minutes, from 3 minutes to 12 minutes. You have all these different practical application of the bechdei achilas prashir. But if you ate it within that shir, then you're going to be chayiv malchus. That's what happened over here. You know, there's still a chiddush here, as we'll see in a moment, because you didn't eat unmixed davar ha'asr. It was mixed with the davar ha'mutar. But since midoiraisa it's not batal, so it's still here. And that's why you chayiv malchus. But if you would only eat the sum total of a kazayis, you would not be chayiv malchus. Beautiful. Frag the Gemara, the kazayis b'chdei achilas pras do'iraisa hi, and it has to be a din do'iraisa, because again, this concept that the Rabbanan were machmer, that in makoy magoi, that place will become tamei. Again, we're not equating that if eating it is a isur do'iraisa, then touching it should make a tummy. We're not saying that, because it is a mixture. It isn't only pure truma. We understand that the imparting of tuma should be more lenient, but for you to be machman a little bit, it must be because eating it is asur doiraisa, so then touching it at least midrabanan we're machman b'makim magoi. So is this rule of kazayis b'chdei achila prasa din doiraisa? Asks the Gemara, on which Tosfos not here. Tosfos and Nazir, the Flamed Vav that quotes the Gemara says, what's even the Havamina? Of course, kazayis b'chdei achila prasa is a din doiraisa. It's a Mishnah in Krisus. Explains Tosfos, yeah. Don't confuse two things. Eating only like the example that I gave of eating chazan. Over the time, within B'chtei Achtilas Pras, that we know already is a din do'iraisa. That's called eating. Don't forget over here, the davar ha'asr for the non-kohen, which is the truma, is mixed with davar hamuter. There is a mixture. How do you know? And I know it's not batal, but still, you're not only eating a davar ha'asr. That's the Gemara's question. Even here is this concept of since you ate it within B'chtei Achilas Pras, even here is it a din do'iraisa? The Gemara says yes. Amalayin. So now we're going to go back to the beginning of our sugya. So, oi bazoi, what did we learn yesterday? The first items that the Mishnah gave was ta'aroivas chametz. This is gavaldik. And we established that our Mishnah is not l'kula alma, whether it is Rav Meir, whether it is Rabbi Eliezer. Regarding ta'aroivas chametz, which Tana was the one that says that if you eat a mixture that has in it chametz, you're taka chayiv malchus, you're not chayiv karis. Good, but you're chayiv malchus. That was Rabbi Eliezer. And the Chachamim, who were not doidish to kol, remember that yesterday, they argue with Rabbi Eliezer. The question is why? If you have a product that has in it non-chametz and chametz, but if when you eat, you end up eating a kazayis of the chametz in the zman of B'chtei Achilas Pras, why would anyone argue with Rabbi Eliezer? How can anyone say that you're not chayiv? Iyachi, amay pli Rabbi Eliezer, b'kutach habavli. Gavaldik, like Rashi writes around 8 or 9 lines before the end of the narrow lines. Zok Rashi nehi nami deloy darshi kol. Yeah, so they don't have a kol to be marbe the eruva the taroivas chametz. Who cares? Who cares? Why? Ha achil mia isur kazais b'chtei achilas pras. No, what's going to be the answer, guys? No, the answer must be that by kotach habavli, the kazayas that you ate of chametz, you did not eat the kazayas of chametz with it. It must be that way. It's gavaldik. It's becoming clear one nekuda. Taroivas chametz in the Mishnah is unique, like Mishras Hanavim, that if you eat a sum total of a kazayas, that is where we say, since there is chametz in there, that's Rabbi Eliezer. That's his chumrah. Ein heter mitztaraf le'isir, right, by all the dinim of the Torah, only means that if you eat a sum total of a kazayis, some is mutter, like Rashi gave the example, half of a kazayis is chaylev and half is shuman, you're not going to be chayiv malchus. Ein heter mitztaraf le'isir. But what we are making clear now, up until now, is that if, the example here is if you have a little bit of truma mixed into a lot of chulin, and a non-kohen eats, but in the zman of B'chtei Achilas Pras, not that he ate a kazayis, he ate so much that he ate a kazayis only of the truma. Here, you don't say heteres mitzaref le'isr, but here you're going to get malchus because you ate a kazayis of a davar that you can't eat. Let's go back over here. Now, why does Rabbanan argue with Rabbi Eliezer? So the Gemara says, Elamai. You want to understand Rabbi Eliezer. Mishum de heter mitzaref le'isr. Okay, but let's make something clear, because don't forget that Rav Dimi is the one that's challenging this ein heter mitzaref le'isr. Your question of why the Chachamim argue with Rabbi Eliezer is independent of whether you accept Rabbi Yechanan's din or not. Let's reject it. Let's say that heter is always mitzaref le'isr. Still, you have to explain. Soif amai pligi Rabbanan le Rabbi Eliezer kutach habavli. And it must be ela hanach le kutach habavli the leis bekizais b'chtei achilas pras. That's the nekuda. That kutach habavli, which has in it some moldy bread. But in the case of kutach habavli, the Gemara is going to say something gavaldik. How do you eat kutach habavli? It's a dip. Over the time of B'chtei Achilas Pras, you will never eat a kazayis of chametz. You'll eat a kazayis of this total dip, which is beautiful. Now, if chametz b'Pesach is an exception to the rule, that's fine. Then you're chayiv malchus. That's the holding of Rabbi Eliezer. Because of the word kol, the taroivus itself becomes chametzik, but that's the exception. Normally, ein heter mitzaref le'isr. Now, the Gemara makes one final point. What happens if someone will drink down kutach habavli? They'll eat it. They will eat a kazayis of chametz b'chtei achilas pras. So one would think from learning the sugya, then even the Rabbanan will hold that they violated eating chametz b'Pesach midoraisa. It's not true. Because it's not meant to be consumed that way. That's a very important point we'll read right now. And now the Gemara adds another detail, that it's not shaykh by Kutach HaBavli if you don't learn the unique, exceptional limud of kol l'rabbi's taroivas chametz, which is Rabbi Eliezer. If you reject that limud, then you're never going to be chayiv for eating taroivas chametz. Making it clear, eating taroivas chametz where you did not eat a kazayis only of the chametz. Because the only way to eat a kazayis of the moldy bread is by not using it as a dip, but pashit, eating the Kutach HaBavli direct, which would mean the kosarif. Kosarif means you're gulping it down. The kosarif, you're burning it. You're burning through it. The kosarif achile, even if you did that, batla date eitzel kol adam, because Kutach HaBavli is not meant to be eaten alone. It's a dip. So what's the maisa achila on the Kutach HaBavli? By dipping things into it. The imishtar koshatar, so you're dipping things into it, and va'achel, and you eat it. You might eat a sum total of a kazayis of the Kutach HaBavli over the 9 minutes, but in that 9 minutes you will never eat a kazayis only of the chametz. Leis bekazayis b'chtei achilas pras. How great is that? So yeah, Danny, this really addresses just what you mentioned yesterday. In other words, first of all, a Mishnah in Kerisus. The shiur of b'chtei achilas pras is not something that's to introduce here when there's a mixture. B'chlal, when it comes, if I have just a davar ha'asur and I eat it over the time of b'chtei achilas pras, not more than it, I did an act of eating. Not only in violation is that way, but in keeping mitzvahs. So we have to have a kazayas of matzah. You have to eat it in the shiur of b'chtei achilas pras. What we're learning here in Pesachim Mem Daled is that if there's something that's asur, that's mixed inside something that's mutter, don't think about tam ki'ikr yet. Forget about tam. Things can be mixed without any imparting of flavor. One example is like, let's begin with the sugya of Rashi yesterday. You have a half a kazayis of chelav and a half a kazayis of basar, and it's cold, and you're not even putting it in your mouth at the same time. You understand? There's no mixture of tam. So the din of Rabbi Yechanan is that we don't say, since you ate the sum total of the kazayis within b'chtei achilas pras, you're going to be chayev malchus. No, ein heter mitzaref le'isr. Taroivas chametz is an exception. Isurei nazir is an exception. But without these exceptions, ein heter mitzaref le'isr. But on the other hand, l'kula alma, if I'm eating a mixture of davar hamuter and davar ha'asr, and I ate only from the davar ha'asr, a kazayis within the period of b'chtei achilas pras, everyone will be moide yechayev malchus. Just because it was mixed with something else is not a reason for you to become more lenient. Now, before we move on, just to mention a very, very important side issue connected to Pesachim Mem Daled. What did the Gemara say right now? That by Kutach HaBavli, even if someone will eat so much Kutach HaBavli that they'll eat one kazayis only of the moldy bread, b'chtei achilas pras, they also won't be chayev if you don't hold like Rabbi Eliezer, because it's not meant to be eaten that way. This is the source of the big machloikas. If you never heard about this, you're going to fall off your chair. Whether you have to make a bracha achrayna for drinking coffee or tea. There's a big machloikas about that. Now, a bracha d'shoina is, there's no shiurim. So you make a shahaka. Now, coffee and tea, I'm speaking about people that drink hot coffee and tea. Something that's very hot cannot be gulped down. Not only that, but when coffee and tea becomes cold, you don't drink it. So many poskim say that you don't make a bracha achrayna for drinking a hot coffee, because the time that it takes you to have the shiur, which is a revius, is more than the time of b'chtei achilas pras. So you never, now you're going to finish the whole cup of coffee. But let's say you have these mugs that have these covers that they insulate it. Fine, so it'll be hot for you. But you don't drink the revius b'chtei achilas pras. Just don't be aware of that. And even if you did it, it's shaloi kedarkei. It's not. It's batla daitoi. Amazing, huh? Danny doesn't like that. Okay, just for those who don't see him. But anyway, this is a big argument over here, and they quote this Gemara here. Weiter. So, Bekitzer, what are we having? What did we begin today?
Rabbi, yes. Rabbi, this concept, right, of batla daitoi, it's a kol adam.
Yes.
By chametz, I never heard of such a thing. Meaning, like we say, you have to get rid of the crumbs because if it's present, you might eat it. It's not the way of people to eat crumbs. It's not the way of people to eat a starter from a dough, sa'ir. No one eats sa'ir. So, but
okay, good. I'm happy to bring it up. Wait, slow down. So here we go. Let's mention. Let's go. Chametz is aser b'mashu. But that's when that's what we began on this Pedic. There's chametz, be'enei, and then you have taroivas chametz. When it comes to taroivas chametz, even our Tana, which is either Rabbi Eliezer or Rav Meir, which is not everyone, you're not chayv kodes. Just remember that. Even Rabbi Eliezer, you're not chayv kodes. The fact that the chametz is mixed with something else, even if it's not halachically batel, you're not chayv kodes. It's a lower iser. More than that, according to Rashi, our Mishnah, the beginning of Elo Evrim holds Yataka Over Bali Ra Bali Yamot. Our Mishnah. According to the Rabbeinu Tam, you're not even over on that. If it's not chametz, the moment that it's chametz mixed into something else, Tosfos, that's the Rabbeinu Tam that we learned, says Yataka Over if you eat it, and you only chayv malchus and not kodes, you're not even over on Bali Ra Bali Yamot. Us getting rid of the little pieces of chametz, that's because it's not mixed with something else. Don't confuse that.
So if you have a piece of pizza, is that called the tarubas because you have chametz with cheese and sauce, and then now you're no longer chayiv karas for eating it?
That's a big question of how do you define tarubas, and that's really a machlokes rishonim over here. Rashi writes, we're learning about Rashi. No one agrees with Rashi that even that's called tarubas chametz, because Rashi, if you remember yesterday, explains when he was speaking there about the haktorah, whether it's mixed together or whether each one is be'en. And everyone challenges. Rashi says that it's both called a mixture. It's both called a mixture. Everyone says, how is that called a mixture? If it's discernible, but just because they're touching each other, but the Rashi holds, that pizza will be tarevus chametz. We do not paskin like that. Okay, let's go weiter. So what are we having? We're having over here, Rav Dimi quoted this din of Rabbi Yechanan that ein heter mitzvah Felice without the exceptions, take out the exceptions, and Abaye is challenging him. So Nachamo, Eisvei, we got to move. Abaye again challenges Rav Dimi. It says in Abraisa, we just learned this above, shtei kederes, if you have two pots, one has chulin, one has truma, and the lefneim, and in front of these two pots, you have shtei madoiches, you have two mortars that have in its spices. The spices in one is of chulin, and in the other is of truma, and the nafal elu l'tochelu, and the spices of one. You don't know which one falls into one of the pots. And if the ones, let's say, of truma fell into the chulin, so it's midama the chulin, then a non-kohen will not be allowed to eat it. So the halacha is, it says in the Brayso, so we don't say that. We say sha'ani yomer. We have the liberty to say, I can say that what? Truma lotech, truma nafla, and chulin lotech, chulin nafla. Now, asks the Gemara, which is what you're trying to farenfer, how none of the dinim above should contradict Rabbahu. So if you have a total of a kazais, then eating it is an isur doiraisa, then amaya menin and shani yomer truma. In other words, it only makes sense for us to be allowed to be lenient and to say, you know what, the truma fell into the truma, and the chulin fell into the chulin, and therefore a non-kohen can eat the chulin, is only that even in the worst case scenario, the problem will be of the rabbanan. Okay, so with the rabbanan you can be mekel. But if taka, the truma fell into the chulin, and you have a kazayis of truma, you have a kazayis of truma, and if someone is going to eat a kazayis, not of the mixture, but he eats so much that he eats only a kazayis of the truma, if that's an isur doiraisa, then how are we allowed to be lenient? So Amalei, no, it's not a problem. Hanach l'trumas tavlin d'Rabbanan. You forgot the whole thing. Let's go with Shitas Rashi in the last line of the Amid. That midoiraisa, what has to be tithed? The gancha, grains, all 5 grains, tiroishcha, right, wine, and the yitzarech oil. And everything else is only midrabanan. So since the whole trumas is midrabanan, so therefore you can take be lenient. But indeed, if it would be an isur de'oiraisa, and that will be mixed in something mutter, and when you would eat, you wouldn't eat just a kazais. You would eat so much that in it would be a kazais of isur, you'll be chayiv malchus. The Gemara says, well, hold on, esvei, same din, but here's another braisa. This braisa is not speaking about tavlin. Here we're speaking about 2 kupais. As we mentioned when we learned this above, a kupa, which is a box, is much larger than the smaller basket of a sa'ah. And here we're only speaking about grain. Grain is something that biblically has to be tithed. 2 kupas. One has grain of chulin. One has grain of truma. And the flame in front of these 2 huge kupas, you have 2 relatively much smaller baskets in the size of only 1 sa'ah. Here also, they both are filled with grain, one of chulin and one of truma. And the nafal elu teichelu. And the contents of the of the basket of the saw fell into the kupa. So says the Braisa that again mutarin because of the sha'ani oimer. We have the right to say sha'ani oimer chulin or chulin. It's the opposite of Murphy's law. Exactly the best scenario happened. And here you can't say it's tavlin derabanan. Here it's grain. It's still an isur da'iraisa, even though we don't say heter mitzvah isur. But if you have the total of a kazayis, then you're violated the da'iraisa, even though it's mixed with something else. And one could have argued, like the Havamina above, that the Mishnah in Kerisus that introduces the B'chtei Achilas Pras, that's only when you eat that item by itself. But maybe if it's mixed, you don't say so. But we are saying that we do still say so. So here, Amai, Ominin, and Sha'ani Yoimet, and here we're speaking about grain. The Gemara gives a Gavaldic answer. Amalei Vaited. What kind of question is that? Says that Avdimi to Abai. Hanach l'truma b'zman hazeh, that it's derabanan. I don't care that it's grain. B'zman hazeh, it's derabanan. And Ataka, if it would have been a problem, if it would have been a davar ha'asun mido ayraisa, we would never be allowed to say sha'ani yomer that the best case scenario happened. It's a typical suffix, and a suffix da'iraisa is l'chomer. Okay, now, so when Rabbi Yochanan said his din, he made an exception. What was his exception? Like we spoke about, that's Torah says chometz yain, chometz shecher, but the nazir lo yishta. The whole mishras anavim. Anything that is anything that is infused with something that comes from grapes, you may not eat. Kol mishras anavim lo, you may not drink. Kol mishras anavim lo yishta. So the example that we gave us is you have bread, you dunk the bread into wine, and you ate it, and the Torah says that you can't drink it. And as we explained, so Rabbi Eliezer had a proof. He says, and now we understand it even better. If the amount of wine in the bread is the shiur of the kazayis or the revi'is by the nazar, it's a kazay. Shira kazayis, and he consumed it with techilas pras. So who needs even mishras? It's avada your chayev. The whole reason, that was his logic, that the Torah needed to say that you can't have something that's infused with a great product is being machadish, that their heter is mitzvah le'isid. So if you only ate a sum total of a kazayis, some of it is bread, some of it is wine, you ate a kazayis, you're going to be chayiv malchus. So says the Gemara, how can Rabbi Eliezer have the mishras to learn this as an exception? That's the exception that Rabbi Yochanan, not Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yochanan learned it. The Amoyra learned it. Amar Rabbi Yochanan chutz from a Surei Nazir because the Torah says mishras. How does he have mishras? Problem is that mishras is a yesoid for another din in Yoredeya, and that is lichedatanya da braisa. Mishras taf mandalo domed beis litein tam keiker gavaldik. Tam keiker means that flavor is equivalent to substance. So the example will be if you have a permitted food that has now in it the flavor of davar ha'asur, it in itself becomes asur. Forget about the kazais. And therefore, if you have water that has in it the taste of grapes, if a nazir has one kazayis of that water, he's going to be chayiv malchus. There is no wine in there. Doesn't matter. It became a davar ha'asur. And that's the mishras. Says the Braisa that she'im sharanovim b'mayim and v'yesh bohen tam yayin, you're going to be chayiv. In the top Rashi, it's interesting that even the liquids by a nazir, since it's all about eating grape product, even though the Torah speaks about don't drink it, but the shiur there is bekazayis. Rashi, second line on top, chay bekazayis. And v'ha, one thing is clear, that has nothing to do with hetem and staraf le'isr. Nothing to do with that. Ela mishum dis aved le kula isur. Aval hetem and staraf le'isr. In other words, guys, you see, there's an overlap. I know sometimes when a davar ha'asur and a davar hamutar gets mixed, sometimes if it was mixed through heat or if it was soaking together, then the taste is imparted. But it doesn't always have to be that way. What we learned until now was what we call the combination principle, that ein heter mitzaref le'isur when there's no tam, when there's no imparting of tam. Problem is that tam ke'ikir is learned from the mishras, but you have no proof, and therefore not like we learned some wine and some bread. Even if there's zero wine, the nazir is going to be chayiv? Because the tam of the mayim has the tam of the yayin. And the mayim itself became asur. It's nothing to do with combination. It's to do with tam ke'ikr. And not only is that something that we learn, the pasuk is written by the nazir, but says the Brayso, mikan atadon l'chol ha'torah kula. Everything is learned from nazir. Why? Because everything has a kal v'chomer. That's how we view nazir. Number one, there are three unique characteristics from nazir that makes it the best teacher. Number one, man nazir she'eni surah yisur olam. A nazir by default. Now I know we're going to learn this mesachtas nazir, the different types of nazirim. You have a nazir olam, you have a nazir shimshon. These are exceptions. A nazir without defining time by default is 30 days. A person can say I'm a nazir for any time longer than 30 days, but normally there's an end. It's not a prohibition forever. Number two, ve'eni surah yisur hana. That's another important klal, that all of the yisurim of a nazir regarding grape products is only not to eat. Number three, v'yesh heter le'isuray. A nazir is just a type of vow. And just like you can be mated any neder, you can be mated a neder of nazirus. And still, it has all of these, so to say, limitations. Yet, so therefore, begins the Brayso. Let's take Kalayim, for example. Number two, the Isura Isur Hana. Right? It's Mugdash. Number three, the Ein Heter Li Isurai is Ein Udin Sheyasa Tam Ke'ikr. And then the Brayso says, I don't need to find items that are in all three more chamer than Nazir. Even Arla, for example. Arla, right, is not called an Isur Olam, because that's a holding of Arla. Never, so it's only B'shtayim that it's more chamur than the Nazir. Really, the Rishonim say, even other Isurim that are only in one more chamur than a Nazir. Only one. Still, you can make a kal v'chomer from Nazir. End of Brayso. So now comes the Gabamba question. How can Rabbi Yochanan learn from Mishnah that when it comes to the combination principle, that a Nazir is the exception? No. Mishnah is the source for Tam Ke'ikr. Says the Gemara, this Brayso is the Rabbanon. And Rabbi Yochanan is quoting Rabbi Akiva. In other words, there is a Tana. Rabbi Akiva holds that heter mitztaref le'iser is learned from the Mishnahs. Now, guys, one thing. Everyone agrees to the principle of Tam Ke'ikr. So what we will need now, first we're going to find Rabbi Akiva, and then we're going to have to explain how does Rabbi Akiva know the rule of Tam Ke'ikr, which according to him cannot be learned from Mishnahs. Mishnahs is speaking about a scenario way beyond Tam Ke'ikr, where there's the Iker is here. You have some wine here, and you combine the bread with the wine for the shiur of a kazayis. But before we get to how does Rabbi Akiva know Tam Ke'ikr, from which Rabbi Akiva, where do we find that Rabbi Akiva learns heter mitztaref le'iser from Mishnahs? So Rabbi Akiva the Masnisin, and according to the Mishnah Mesachtes Nazir, that Rabbi Akiva says Nazir sheshara pitay beyayin v'yesh by mitztaref kedei kazayis your chayiv. So then, by the way, over here there's no Tam Ke'ikr. Here there's no imparting of flavor. Here there's no one, but there's no heat involved. There's no imparting of flavor. You know, you ate bread that has in it wine. So you ate bread and you ate wine together. And the Mishnah Rabbi Akiva says you're chayiv. Now let's bring back Amud Aleph. Who told you that Mishnah is speaking about a case where the sum total of what you ate was one kazayis? Maybe not. Maybe ein heter mitztaref le'iser. Maybe the case of the Mishnah of Rabbi Akiva is that you ate so much of this bread dipped into wine that just the wine you ate a shiur of a kazayis, and you ate that b'toich chedei achilas pras. That everyone holds your chayiv. Has nothing to do with siruv. Has nothing to do with combination. Says the Gemara, that the kazayis is from all of you ate exactly one kazayis. Some of it is pras and some of it is yayin. No, maybe the Mishnah is speaking about that you ate so much of this bread dipped into the wine that you have a kazayis only from the yayin. And v'chitema miyayin l'chudei ma'ila memra. Well, why would I even eat a Mishnah? So the Gemara says no. Hakamashmalon, like we learned in Amud Aleph, that yes, we have a Mishnah in Kerisus that teaches us the eating toich chedei achilas pras, but that Mishnah is speaking about eating only the davar ha'asur. Here it's mixed. So still, Rabbi Akiva wants to speak out that even though you ate something asur with something mutter, if you ended up eating ekezayis only from the davar ha'asur, that's when you're going to be chayiv malchus. How do you know that he holds that a heter is mitzaref le'isr? So the Gemara says, well, from the Mishnah you don't know, but the Braisa makes that clear. Ela Rabbi Akiva the Braisa on that Mishnah nazir. The Tanya Rabbi Akiva oimer nazir sheshara pite bayayin v'achol kezayis mi pas u mi yayin. He ate one kezayis. The total that's comprised of pas and yayin. Again, here there's no imparting of flavor. Here you're eating two things, but some of it is asur, some of it is mutter. Rabbi Akiva says you're chayiv. And where will he learn this from? It must be from Mishras. That's a given. So since Rabbi Akiva learns it from Mishras, so Rabbi Yochanan follows Rabbi Akiva. So that closes now all of the challenges against Amar Rabbi Yochanan. But now that we have a machloikas, what Mishras is used for, and the Gemara is going with the premise, which is correct, that everyone subscribes to the rule of Tam Ke'iker. Mela the Chachamim learned that from the Braisa we just quoted on top of the Amid, that Mishras teaches you Litein Tam Ke'iker. But now Rabbi Akiva Tam Ke'iker, Minole, beautiful, answers the Gemara. Another important thing, guys, that Siruf that Rabbi Akiva is learning about from Mishras, there it's not about Tam, also important. There the Iker is here. The definition of when will something no longer be called substance? When will it become a flavor? So let's go with the Rishonim that say it has to do whether that item is discernible to the eye. If you can see it, then the problem is that you're having the substance itself. The moment you cannot see it, then we call that, if you can still taste it, that's not called substance. That's called tam. Okay, so says the Gemara, let's begin. Rabbi Akiva learns it from the Isur of Basar B'Cholov. Now it's beautiful. If some milk falls into meat, that milk is not discernible to the eye because it's a liquid. Or forget about cooking. Not cooking. Stop mixing. Some milk went into meat. You can't see the milk. You can't eat it together. Why? Because of Tam Ke'iker. If we would not consider the Tam problematic, then there's only meat here. So Yalef mi Basar B'Cholov. And Lav Tama Ba'alma, who is Basar B'Cholov, a scenario, well, really, I should speak about cooking because that's the Isur D'Oraisa. Once you cook milk in meat, you don't see it. So the only part of milk is the tam of the milk, and yet it's asur. So hachinami loishna. So basar b'cholav will be the source. Rabbi Akiva l'chol ha'torah kula the tam ke'iker. Now the problem is since the Torah says loisavashali b'chalei v'imai, and that's taka tam ke'iker. So why did the Chachamim need to learn it from Mishras? Why did they not learn it from Basar B'Cholov? Says the Gemara B'Rabbanan, they accept that Basar B'Cholov is based on the principle of Tam Ke'iker, but Basar B'Cholov is a Chiddush. You can't learn anything from Basar B'Cholov because the Chiddushu, and many times the Gemara fills out the sentence, Umi Chiddush aloi gamrinan. Chiddush means there's something unique. Not only is there something unique about Basar B'Cholov, but there are some parts of these dinim that goes against the general rules of the Torah. So if the Torah makes an exception somewhere, we call that a chiddush. Well, ein boy ela masha b'chidushay. Fine, so that's the Torah's machadish, but it can never become a teacher to everything else. What's the chiddush? What's the anomaly that we find by Basar B'Cholov? So the Gemara says you can't say you can't say, well, you have two items, each one by itself is permitted, the milk by itself to meat, and now that you put them together, it's asur. Wow, that doesn't make sense. That's a chiddush. No, it's not a chiddush. The Gemara says there are other areas in the Torah. It doesn't go against the rules of the Torah. This goes consistent with other rules in the Torah. For example, kalayim. For example, in kalayim, will the shatness, kalayim nami. Let's say wool and linen. I can wear a garment of linen, I can wear a garment of wool, but ubahadadi asa. So the Gemara says, you're right. But let me tell you what is the chiddush of Basar B'Cholov. Elo the itarulei kula yoyim b'chalba. If you soak it together, mida oiraisa Basar B'Cholov is only sevashal. If you don't cook it together, mida oiraisa, that's not a problem. So we're speaking on a biblical level. So how can it be that you can put meat and soak it in milk for the whole day, and mida oiraisa, it's mutter, and the moment you cooked it, now you made it asur? That you don't find by shatnez. The moment you put it together, it's asur mida oiraisa. So this is such a chiddush. Only what does the cooking do? If it's mixture, you can't have the mixture. So because of that, it's called a chiddush, and the Rabbanan say, oh, you can't learn anything from a chiddush. Rabbi Akiva, take nami basa b'chalav v'ade chiddushu, can't argue with that. So indeed, Rabbi Akiva will not learn it from basa b'chalav. No, basa b'chalav functions because of the klal of tam ke'ikir, but it cannot be a source to teach for the rest of the Torah. Eliyalef migi uli nachrim. In Parshas Matos, after we won the war against the Midianites, and that's the source in the Torah. The Torah says, Kol asher yavai ba'esh, taviru ba'esh. Everything that was used in water, hot water, all of the dinim of giolak, of giule kelim, is all learned from Parshas Matos. Now, why do I b'chlal need to remove the tam of the non-kosher food from the kelim? The substance is not discernible. What's in the keli? The tam of an isur. Yet the fact that the Torah says you have to kasher it, giuli nachrim lav taima ba'almo, it's only tam. Can't see it. And yet, without kashering it, you may not cook it at vaser. So achinami loishno. So now we're back to the question. Taka, that's a great source. Tam ke'ikir. Why do the chachamim need to learn it from Mishnahs? Why don't they learn it from giuli nachrim? So the Gemara says the Rabbanan will tell you the same thing. Giuli nachrim nami chidushu. Why is it a chiddush? There is a rule called tam livga muter, that if the tam from the davar ha'asur is already pogum, it's putrid, it's not as good as it used to be, even though there is a imparting of this pogum dika flavor, it's not a problem. And how do we know that tam livga is muter? So Gemara says we learn it from the din of an avela. How do we learn it from an avela? Says Rashi. We had this again above in the Perek, in the prior Perek. The whole Rababo from Israchil, Israno, the pasuk by nevela. The Torah says that don't eat an avela, but you can give it to the ger. You can sell it to the non-Jew. Hold on. So what nevela is an avela that may not be eaten? Something that a ger toishav, someone who's not obligated to keep the dinim, something that a non-Jew can eat. It's still edible. Something that's pogum, that a ger won't eat, that a non-Jew won't eat, on that there is no isur for a yid to eat. Guys, that's important. When it comes to chametz, we mentioned that if something was edible, it only becomes non-food when it's not even roi lachilas kelev. That's an exception by chametz. By other isurei Torah, something is edible. If it's no longer edible, we're calling that pogum, it's not asur to eat. So let's come back over here. So we know from Nevela that Noisem Tam Lev Gam is mutter, yet why do you have to do Hagala? Noisem Tam Lev Gam. And here you see you have to do Hagala. So that's an chidush. Now hold on a second. Who told you that the Tam is Pagum? So really, this is the Gemara. This is the Gemara. You know, whatever you're thinking, the Gemara is going to speak out. And Abba Kiva will say, no, Giyuli Nachrim, if the Tam is Pagum, you don't have to kasher it. What is the problem of Giyuli Nachrim? If the guy used this pot to cook food that's not kosher today, on the same day, it's not pogum yet. Rabbi Kiva will hold like Rabbi Chia Bereid Rav Huna, the Amar, that lo yasra Torah, the whole need of us when we captured the kalim of the Midyanim, we needed to do to kasher the kalim, was lo yasra Torah ela b'kedei bas yoima. Because if it was used that day, the tam that's in the pot is not halachically pogum yet. But he'll koch lavlis and tam gamu. Gewaltig. You have to kasher it when it's not pogum. There's no chidush there. But if
do the Chachamim hold that even after a day, and that it would still be a problem?
And the Rabbanan in the opposite direction. The Chachamim hold, they agree with Rabbi Akiva that after 24 hours the tam becomes even more pogum. But the Chachamim hold the moment the taste of the food goes into the walls of the utensils, it's already not as flavored as the food itself. There's right away a little bit of a pigam. And yet, they also hold that for the first 24 hours, you have to kasher it. I just want to tell everyone that we actually paskin that noisem tam lev gam is take mutter b'diavad. That's chumrah. In other words, even after 24 hours passed, lichatchila we have to kasher the kelim. But if one did not, then you rely on this din of leisum tam gam. But here we're learning there's two levels of pigam. The rabbanan kedera bas yoyma nami lo yefsher dole pagma purta. Epis of pigam there is. It's not in the food. It's in the walls of the keli. So they consider that a chidush. So the Rabbanan learned from Mishnahs. Rabbi Kiva holds that during the first 24 hours, no, the taste, the tam is there. So we use Giuli Nachrim as the source for Nes and Tam of Gam. So why do we use Mishnahs for? Mishnahs is that a heter is mitztaref le'iser by a nazir. How great is that? Says the Gemara, we're all going back to Rabbi Yechanan, right, who holds that we do say heter mitztaref le'iser by the nazir. Midrabanan nishmal Rabbi Kiva. Why don't we use the same logic of the Rabbanan? Why don't we pass that over to Rabbi Kiva? And this is a kasha, as the Gemara explains. Mi loy omri Rabbanan mishras litein tam ke'ikr. The Rabbanan, as we had on top of the Amud, they learned from mishras tam ke'ikr. But what did the Braisa say? That a nazir is so lenient, and yet we say tam ke'ikr, right? It's not a isur oilam. There's no isur hana. There's a heter li'isurai. So once the Torah is megala edin by nazir, it becomes a teacher to everything else. And indeed, l'Rabbanan, tam ke'ikr is not unique to a nazir. Tam ke'ikr is learned from nazir to the entire Torah. So, and the Chachamim say, right, 3 lines before the bottom of them, that mikan atadon l'chol isurim shabbat Torah. So get it. Rabbi Akiva doesn't need mishras for tam ke'ikr. He learns that from Giuli Nachrim. Okay, so he learns mishras, and that's Rabbi Yechanan was just quoting him, that by nazir, heter is mitztaref le'iser. Forget about tam. You have grape juice. You have a product of in bread. You only ate a kazayis together. Heter mitztaref le'iser. Well, now that the Torah was megala by a nazir, that it's ein yisura yoilam, and there's no isur hana, and yes, heter li'isurai, that heter is mitztaref le'iser, then why wouldn't Rabbi Akiva, why wouldn't now Rabbi Yechanan say, mikanat olamed l'chol ha'Torah kula, that heter is mitztaref le'iser? So Rabbi Akiva nami, mishras leheter mitztaref le'iser, and he taka learns it for that by the nazir, but why don't we say the last line, that mikanat adon l'chol isurim shabbat Torah kulam? Why is it only limited to a nazir? And then Ze'iri added to the chametz. But why is it a limited halacha? Amar lei. Why should Rabbi responds? Well, let's just read the first 2 lines, because then we're going to have to go further. Daf mem hey, you're right. If the Torah only would have revealed the din of heter mitztaref le'iser by a nazir, you're right. Rabbi Akiva would have used that as a source. Rabbi Yechanan, Rabbi Bo, they would have used that as a springboard for the entire Torah. Happens to be that aside of the din of heter mitztaref le'iser, that we apply this combination principle, it's not only by nazir, it's also by achatos. Now that we'll leave it ready for tomorrow. But this is finished. So once the Torah is megala that twice, now we already have the other principle. So now and the rule is ve'emalamdim, because if indeed nazir would have been the source for the rest of the Torah, why would Hashem have to say the same thing by chatos? Learn it from nazir. And God willing, now we're going to continue with this sugya all the way up until the Mishnah in tomorrow's class. Guys, this was a good daf. I'm saying for people that are there, these are the big klalim. Good. Have a good day, guys.